When a lonesome rancher rescues a lost Navajo girl, he has no inkling her mother harbors a secret strong enough to reshape the Wild West forever. Romance, danger, and fate entwine beneath the prairie stars in this unforgettable frontier saga. Do you follow and heart for more epic Wild West tales filled with grit and soul? Hey, hit that like and subscribe button to keep these stories coming, and drop a comment. Where are you listening from? The sun sank low over the Arizona plains, casting a fiery crimson-orange glow across the mesas and bone-dry arroyos. Rancher Jake Sullivan rode his sorrel mare steadily through the bluffs, the rhythmic thud of hoofs echoing in the vast stillness. It had been another exhausting day, patching barbed wire, herding stray calves, and fixing what the sun and storms had torn apart. The west was hushed that evening, almost too hushed, until he caught a faint, faltering sound, like a child's sob carried on the breeze. Jake eased back on the reins, his chest tightening. The sound came again, clearer now, near the parched creek bed below the rise. He dismounted carefully, his boots crunching into the cracked earth as he followed the soft weeping. The fading light stretched long shadows across the boulders, each one reaching like a whisper from the past. When he finally found the source, he froze. There, huddled beside a trickle of water, was a young Navajo girl, barefoot, her hair tangled with sand. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her small fingers clutched a woven doll of straw, its form tattered, its face missing. Her cheeks were streaked with grime, her lips cracked from thirst. She didn't cry when Jake approached. She just looked up with eyes too heavy for her years, eyes that had already tasted hunger, fear, and loss. Jake knelt slowly, tipping his hat in quiet respect, careful not to startle her. "It's all right, kid," he murmured, his voice low and warm, like he was calming a spooked foal. From his saddlebag he pulled a tin canteen of water, holding it out. The girl stared for a moment before snatching it and drinking desperately, water spilling down her chin. When she finished, she handed it back without a word, her tiny frame trembling in the cool dusk air sweeping through the gorge. Jake took his woolen serape, still faintly scented with leather and campfire, and draped it gently over her shoulders. The child flinched at first, then sank into its warmth, her eyelids drooping with exhaustion. He wanted to ask questions, where her family was, what happened, but something in her silence stopped him. Words weren't needed. Her face told enough. Somewhere out there, something terrible had unfolded, and this small soul had walked out of it alone. And if you're loving this tale, smash that like and subscribe button and let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? The trail home wound through jagged cliffs and patches of sagebrush. By the time they reached the Sullivan homestead, the rain had turned to a downpour, washing the dust from the land. Jake carried her inside his simple cabin, the warmth from the adobe fireplace filling the air with the scent of burning cedar. He laid her on his cot and covered her with another blanket, then crouched by the hearth, watching the flames dance in her reflection. Hours passed before she stirred. Her eyes flicked open, scanning the unfamiliar room, the shelves of worn books, the old shotgun by the door, the single rocking chair by the fire. When she spotted Jake, she tensed, ready to bolt. He raised his hands slowly, palms open. "It's all right here," he said. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you." She didn't reply, only turned her face to the wall and closed her eyes again. He sighed. It would take time. Come morning, sunlight poured through the chipped window panes, illuminating her small form curled under the blanket. Jake set a bowl of oatmeal and a tin mug of milk on the table beside her. "Eat when you're ready," he said, stepping outside to give her space. He stood by the corral, gazing at the distant peaks. The west was changing. New telegraph poles, new outposts, and ancient tribes caught in the middle. He knew this girl carried a story tied to that change, one that could stir up more than he bargained for. By midday, she emerged quietly, clutching the serape around her. She pointed toward the horizon and whispered one word, "Mama." Her voice was barely a breath. Jake's heart sank. Somewhere out there, a mother was searching, or worse, already lost. "We'll find her," he promised, though he had no clue where to start. He fetched a small turquoise stone from his late sister and tied it to a leather cord. He placed it around the girl's neck for luck. She held it tightly, as if it were something holy.
That night, as the wind howled across the open prairies, Jake couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, staring at the tiny figure sleeping peacefully in his bed, the flickering light casting soft shadows across her face. He thought of all the lives broken by the frontier, families torn apart, tribes scattered, men hardened by survival. But this child reminded him that innocence could still survive here, fragile yet defiant, like a desert flower pushing through rock. Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a long rumble of thunder. Jake rose and secured the shutters, murmuring, "You're safe now, little one." The words felt heavier than they sounded. Deep down, he knew safety was only temporary. The frontier had a way of testing every promise. Still, he'd made one, and Jake Sullivan was not a man who broke his word. As the storm raged through the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting wasn't chance. Somewhere beyond the horizon, forces were already moving. People, memories, and secrets waiting to collide. The girl had brought something with her, something more than sorrow. And though he didn't yet understand it, Jake sensed that saving her would change his life forever, binding his fate to hers beneath the vast, untamed sky of the American West. The morning broke with a silver mist rising off the grasslands. The air was cool, touched by dew, and the first rays of sunlight painted long streaks of gold across Jake Sullivan's homestead. He stirred from restless sleep, hearing something unusual. Hoofbeats, steady and deliberate, approaching through the fog. His hand instinctively reached for the shotgun by the door. Out here, a stranger rarely came bearing good news. He stepped outside, boots grinding against the damp earth, and saw a lone figure emerging from the haze, a woman on horseback, riding straight toward him. She was tall and regal, her hair long and braided with beads, her clothes torn from travel, but her bearing unbroken. Even from a distance, Jake could see the fire in her eyes, a strength born of loss and survival. The little girl, still half asleep, ran to the doorway and froze. "Mama," she whispered. The woman stopped, slid off her horse, and fell to her knees. In the pale light, mother and child clung to each other, silent tears tracing the dust on their faces. Jake stood a few feet away, his throat tight, not wanting to intrude on their reunion. For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sun rose higher, cutting through the mist, and the woman lifted her gaze to meet Jake's. Her expression softened, but carried weight, a mix of gratitude and caution. "You found her," she said quietly, her voice both melodic and edged with resolve. "I did," he replied, tipping his hat. "She was alone out there, wouldn't have made it through the night." The woman nodded slowly. "My name is Talise, and you've done more than save my child. You've saved what remains of my soul." Jake offered her water and food, leading her inside. She moved like a warrior, yet exhaustion clung to her steps. While her daughter ate, Talise sat near the fire, silent for a while, studying Jake as if measuring his spirit. Finally she spoke. "Our village was attacked by soldiers last week. They said they were chasing bandits, but they took everything. My husband was their first target. He was a chief, a man of peace. They called him a rebel because he refused to sign their treaty." Jake said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He'd heard those stories before, how justice and greed often wore the same uniform. The room fell quiet, except for the crackle of the fire. Talise continued. "Before he died, he gave me something to protect. A message meant for the leaders of both sides. It carries truth and danger. If it falls into the wrong hands, there'll be more blood on this land than any of us can bury." She glanced toward her daughter. "They think my girl carries it now." Jake's eyes narrowed. "You mean the soldiers?" She nodded. "And bounty hunters too. They believe she holds the mark of her father's tribe, the key to uniting the clans. Jake leaned back in his chair, thinking fast. He had no stake in wars or treaties, but now his cabin had become a beacon in a storm he didn't start. "You should rest," he said finally. "You and the girl, both. I'll make sure nobody gets close." Talise looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "If you protect us, they'll come for you too." He met her gaze without flinching. "Then they'll have to ride through me first." Something in his tone made her believe him. The next few days passed in uneasy calm. Jake taught the child to feed the chickens, showed her how to brush the mare's mane. Her laughter returned, bright and fragile, like a melody breaking through clouds. Talise watched, torn between relief and worry. At night she'd stand outside under the vast stars, whispering prayers in her native tongue, her hand resting on a small pouch tied around her neck, the message her husband had died to protect. She knew the peace they'd found here couldn't last. The frontier had ears, and secrets had wings. One evening, while Jake was mending a fence, he noticed tracks near the ridge. Fresh hoof prints. Government issue. He didn't need to guess twice. The soldiers had found their trail. He rode back hard, breath shallow, dust stinging his eyes. "Pack what you can," he told Talise the moment he reached the cabin. "They're close." She didn't panic. She took her daughter's hand and said, "Then it's time you know the truth." From the pouch, she pulled a folded piece of buckskin, covered in symbols and words, half Navajo, half English. "This," she said, "is the pact my husband wrote himself, proof that peace was offered and denied."
Jake stared at it, realizing what it meant. "If this gets out," he murmured, "it could change everything." Talise nodded. "That's why they want it buried forever." The sound of distant gunfire cut their conversation short. The soldiers were near. Jake's instincts took over. "Go out the back," he ordered. "Ride for the canyon. I'll lead them the other way." Talise hesitated, her eyes full of conflict. "Why would you risk your life for us?" Jake looked at her, the wind whipping through his hair. "Because some things are worth protecting, even if they ain't yours." He fired a warning shot into the air, drawing the soldiers toward him. His mare thundered across the open plains, weaving through sagebrush and dust as bullets split the air around him. Behind him, Talise and her daughter disappeared into the narrow canyon, the sound of their galloping hooves fading like a heartbeat in the wind. Jake reached a ridge, turned, and fired again, his aim true, his courage unshaken. He wasn't fighting for glory, he was fighting for a promise, for a mother's love, and for a child's right to live free. Hours later, when the gunfire ceased and the horizon turned red again, Talise and her daughter returned. They found Jake slumped against a rock, wounded but alive. The girl ran to him, crying softly. Talise knelt beside him, pressing her hands against his wound. "You shouldn't have come back," he said weakly. She smiled faintly. "You gave us hope. Now we give you life." As she tore a strip of cloth to stop the bleeding, he looked at her and whispered, "You said they'd come for me. Guess you were right." The night settled around them like a blanket. The soldiers had retreated, leaving silence and the smell of gunpowder behind. Jake, weak but breathing, watched as Talise placed the pact in the flames. "Let the truth live in hearts," she said softly, "not on hide." He understood. Some things weren't meant to be written. They were meant to be remembered. As dawn broke once more, the three of them stood together by the creek where it had all begun. A rancher, a mother, and a child, bound not by blood, but by fate and the unyielding heart of the wild frontier. If this story moved you, give it some love. Hit that like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? And let's keep the fire burning.
give some hype to this video to spread the word about these Wild West tales.